which is not Boise time, because Boise is probably mountain time, right?
Boise's mountain time, yeah.
Okay. And San Francisco is not mountain time, it's Pacific time.
It's Pacific. So I had a little bit of anxiety about whether or not my computer was going to get me in the right time zone when I got here.
Yeah, welcome to our world, because the majority of our congregations are in the Eastern time zone. So wherever you are and whatever time it is where you are, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And it is the top of the hour, somewhere. Welcome to Thursday lunch and learn and listen in whatever order that works for you. And I'm really excited about today for a variety of reasons. Marci Glass is the pastor at Calvary Presbyterian Church in San Francisco, but it really is your Boise connection that created the invitation to be with us today, because it all started in Boise, right? How often can you say that? I mean, that's a great thing to be able to say. And our presbytery, Marci, received our portion of the Peace and Global Witness offering. We're a 4 for 4 presbytery here, and we say that with sinful pride. And we designated, our council designated that the portion that we get to keep and designate would go to RIP medical debt.
Great.
And the backstory for you and for folks who were not at that assembly meeting was that our esteemed colleague, Carol McDonald, gave the minute for mission that day for the Peace and Global Witness offering and for RIP medical debt, and said, by the way, I'm throwing down the gauntlet, and in a more peaceful way than that. And I'm going to make an extra commitment gift to RIP medical debt. And a lot of people followed suit, and that was really exciting. So much so that the Visioning and Communications team is going to be talking with our coordinating council later on this month to think about a 2021 theme for the presbytery. We're a Matthew 25 mid-council. And so we're going to be lifting up that theme all year long with council's permission, with a special emphasis and special attention and kind of high definition focus on RIP medical debt. And so we invited Marci to be with us today because when she was pastor at Southminster Presbyterian Church in Boise, she kind of threw down the gauntlet too, and worked with both her congregation and her presbytery to respond to people's critical medical debt, crippling medical debt through this organization. And it's a really good story about how that all took root and then blossomed and flourished, and it's kind of it's kind of like kudzu. It's kind of taken over, and other mid councils have accepted the challenge as well. It's kind of our version of the ice bucket challenge, if you remember that from a few years back for ALS. So I'm delighted to welcome Marci Glass to our midst. You may know her from other settings around the PCUSA. She's a leader in a lot of different environments, and we're really, really grateful that the lemonade of the lemons of a pandemic allow us to just zoom around and have friends with us. And so Marci, thanks for being with us today. Our format typically is that we let you have the floor, and you tell us stories and talk to us and leave some room for questions. And typically what we do, we're recording this because we always have folks who have conflicts at this time, and they may want to see the repeat. And so, everybody watch your language, because, it's going to go on YouTube. But we also, if you're willing and available and have a few minutes to spare, sometimes people want to say something to you like, my cousin lives in Boise, or, I want to tell you what I really think about RIP medical debt, but I don't want to go on the recording and say that, and I don't want to say it in the larger group. So we call that standing around in the narthex after church. And
Sure.
so if you're willing to stay with us for a few minutes after for informal conversation, we'd be grateful. And if you have a prior commitment, we understand. Sometimes we linger in the narthex just because we want to see our friends. So thanks for being with us. You are unmuted. You're ready to go. We're recording. Welcome, welcome.
Great. Thank you for having me. I realize I do know a couple of faces. Lucia, I met, I don't know, long time ago doing youth ministry, probably 25 years ago. So that's fun to see people from across my life in the church. Southminster, where I was serving until this August or July, was one of the early Matthew 25 churches, because at the time I was serving on the mission agency board for the national church. So I heard about the program right when it rolled out. And I signed us up as a Matthew 25, or I took it to the session so they could talk about it, because one of the challenges I had with Southminster is getting them to be in relationships, in a missional kind of relationship with people outside of the building that wasn't about money, that was about building relationships. And I thought Matthew 25 would be a good thing. They were, they were happy to give money, but I had a harder time getting them to go find out what their neighborhood really needed, to go talk to the school or to, do that sort of outreach in the community. I'm sure that's not an uncommon challenge. And so we talked about Matthew 25, and then RIP medical debt. I actually saw it on a late night TV show, and I thought, well, that's a perfect thing for a church to do. Like, it's an easy way to to combine our resources and to really make a difference. And what RIP does basically is they buy debt off the market, and it isn't fixing the system, which is one of the things that Matthew 25 is about, right? We acknowledge that this is still a broken system, and so we're still working to change the system, but it is trying to make the best within the broken system that we have. So they buy debt off this market, and by them buying the debt, it keeps it from going into the hands of predatory debt collectors. And then they can, and at the point in the debt stream that they purchased it, it's pennies on the dollar. So we were able to, and you can donate any amount of money and it'll be purchased to buy debt. But if you want to indicate like specifically where the debt will be relieved, and we wanted to relieve debt in Idaho, then you have to raise at least $15,000, which was a bit of a challenge for my congregation at the time, but they thought it was a doable one. We ended up bringing the presbytery in to invite them to join us in it. And so the congregation raised a little over 10,000, and then the presbytery contributed just under 5,000. And we were able to purchase $1.6 million of medical debt, which at the time that they were buying it was all of the debt that was available to purchase in Idaho. And so the people then received a note with their debt that Southminster Presbyterian Church in Boise and Boise Presbytery have relieved your debt. We didn't actually hear from anybody. We didn't ask them to reach out either, but we didn't hear from anybody whose debt we had paid. So I'm not honestly sure how that communication piece worked, but then it got picked up on the news, and more people heard about it. One of the conversations that got started is the director or the chair of the foundation at one of the hospitals here in Boise asked to meet with me, and we talked about how that hospital, because they're contributing to this medical debt problem, right? I mean, they're trying to fix it, but it's still, they're one of the contributors to why we have a medical debt problem, and is the way our whole medical system is structured. And so he and I were talking about would there be a way for the community to come together and purchase debt further up the stream before it gets in the hands of the predatory lenders, because by the time it's available to be purchased by RIP, it's already been on the market for a while, right? And they sell it first at, I don't know what, 50% and then 25%. And then it gets down to, you know, much further down. And so that's something that he's still trying to work out. I suspect with COVID and all those plans that it's maybe not as high on their priority list right now. But trying to find a way to get the foundation and to get, you know, to leverage the power of community donations to keep that debt from ever going on that market. There were a few people who said, well, why should we be paying off somebody else's debt? I'm paying my debt. And it, you know, there's a couple of parables that speak to that. So we talked about that. We talked about grace in general, and you know, there were people who had some hesitations about participating in the system that's so broken. You know, like, aren't we just becoming debt collectors, so to speak? Which I guess technically, sure, we were, but if we weren't asking them to pay it back, I don't think it's the same. One of the things that I had experienced in my time as pastor is I have had a small kind of discretionary account that I can use to help people in crisis in the congregation. And I've found that people tend to not want to ask for that money. There's a pride issue and you know, they want that money to be used for somebody else. And so, but I'll kind of hear about things and go reach out to people and say, you know, we can help you with that. Would you let the church help with that? And I would say most of the things that that the church discretionary kind of allowance went to while I was there was helping people pay medical bills. You know, their daughter had had her third surgery and she had lost her job because, you know, whatever, because she was recovering from surgery. And so she didn't have health care. And, you know, I mean, all of those stories that we've heard. So there's, you know, moms and dads and siblings and whoever, we're all trying to cover each other's medical bills. So a lot of that discretionary money was going toward that. With RIP, you can't designate individuals to receive, like, I can't say, I want you to buy, you know, Carol McDonald's medical debt, right? It's just whatever debt they can purchase in that aggregate business. So you can't, you can't purchase the debt of an individual. We did actually raise a little over the $15,000 when things were said and done. And so we reached out to people in the congregation that we knew had medical debt and asked if they would like some of that money to help with their own debts. A couple people took us up on it and most of them said, no, pay it forward. We're okay. We'll be fine. But it, you know, this process did kind of reveal that while it was a great feel good kind of story, and it's nice to say we were able to pay off $1.6 million in medical debt. And, you know, that made a difference in the lives of, I can't remember now, like 60,000 Idahoans or it was a big number of people. I can't remember now what it was. But, you know, in truth, it didn't fix everything, right? It didn't, the system is still there. There were still people that we knew in our congregation who still had debt. It, you know, kind of reminded us of that, even though it didn't really meet all that Matthew 25 requirement of dismantling structures, it did remind us of the need to do that and kind of lift up how broken the structures really are. So I'm happy to pause for questions at this point.
Great. Let's see what questions are on your minds. What has this raised for you that you'd like to ask, Marci? I think this is not a question so much as a comment, Marci. I think the invitation on RIP's part to designate your state as a recipient has to be a compelling thing for people who want to feel as though they're addressing
Mhm.
close by neighbors' needs,
Yeah.
closer by.
Yeah, and I will say the other thing about RIP is that they, there's a very small overhead fee, but it's not a, it's a pretty direct pipeline. They really are kind of funneling our money into the medical debt relief market. They were super easy to work with. I just reached out on, through their website, got an email, and the person reached out to me really quickly, let me know what we needed to do. And it was seems to be a very good system and a very good process. We felt, because we kind of looked into that and kind of read their ratings, and if you're sending $15,000 to somebody, you want to make sure they're, not some fly-by-night group, but they really seem to be a good organization. They were very, very helpful. And at first, when we looked at it, there actually wasn't $1 million worth of debt available to buy in Idaho at that moment. But by the time we raised the money, it was. So we had plans to pay for whatever we could in Idaho, and then the rest could go wherever the need was greatest. I think at that moment, the need was greatest in Arizona. So.
Awesome. So Marci, the folks on this call are all people, leaders who are active in local congregations and or in our presbytery. And so talk to us, if you would, some more about some of the frequently asked questions as you were presenting it to Southminster and to the presbytery that you encountered, because our hope is always that there's takeaway for folks in their local congregations if they choose to talk with anybody else about the things we talk about here.
Yeah, so I, and also kind of more broadly with Matthew 25, they ask you to focus on at least one of the three areas. The church I'm serving now is focusing pretty heavily on the systemic racism and then the alleviating poverty. And so the medical debt conversation for us was really about the poverty issue. And so we talked a lot about the economics of medical debt. You can tell people to be careful and to save money and to, do that. But if your child needs to have their appendix taken out, like, you're going to do it even if you don't have the money for it, right? I mean, like, there are things that override our best intentions, and when and so I think there are well-meaning Christians in congregations who have been raised on the narrative of climbing out of poverty yourself and doing, your own bootstrap pulling and all of that. Right. I mean, and it's an American myth, right? And I mean that in a identifying way, not in a, it's not true way. It's an American story, right? That we are self-made and we have done all of this by ourselves. And so relieving the medical debt of strangers runs up against that identifying myth of Americans' self-sufficiency. And so we had some conversations about that too. And, when you hear that, if people have the safety to voice that concern, right? I mean, I think because it doesn't sound terribly charitable when you're saying that out loud in a congregational meeting. But so I think it's an important thing to note and probably even to address before they have to ask it, because they're probably thinking it if they haven't asked it. And so I shared this story about and, you know, so in my preaching, I talk about how, I told the story once about how I'm grateful for all of the people who helped me succeed as a child. My father lost his vision when I was a kid. He had detachments in both of his retinas, which now wouldn't be a problem, but in 1977 was a big problem. So he lost his job, and I received, like, I had reduced price lunches. We had food stamps. My sister got, and I too we got good loans to go to college. We were the first kids in our family, generationally, to go to college. And, you know, so I'm grateful for the ways that those opportunities allowed me to succeed, and um, and didn't automatically make me a moocher who was going to, you know, bag off the system, you know, and feed off the system for the rest of my life. And so I think, I mean, and there obviously are stories of people who do that, but I think it's helpful to lift up those other stories too, of where the social safety net can really make a difference for people. I and I think that medical debt can be one of those things where you think, well, pay your own bills, you know, don't, you know, don't go to the doctor if you don't have money. I don't know. There's those things that I think we want to think we would do ourselves until it's a crisis. But so I think kind of addressing that before people even ask it is probably worth the time. And then also just to keep preaching, you know, preaching those parables of the, you know, the workers who get hired at the end of the day, and the, you know, there's a lot of stories in scripture about, you know, graces we don't always get what we deserve, and we do get what we don't deserve. And so, you know, I think that can help with this too. You know, and also the other thing I'll throw out there is, though, there's so many people I think now who have medical debt and who know about people who have medical debt, and over 60% I think of bankruptcies now are medical debt related. It's a staggeringly huge cross section. So I think the judgment is starting to come down a little bit about it, because people are seeing it in the people that they know and love, and recognizing that this is a much bigger problem.
Not to mention in this season of COVID.
Right. Yeah.
Leveling all kinds of playing fields, all kinds of topics. So what does this raise for you, people of God? Marci, I thought you were going to go there on the disparity, the racial disparities in our healthcare system. For a minute, I thought you were going to head off there, and if you wanted to, I mean, no pressure. If you wanted to address that, I think too that for a mid-council whose congregations don't reflect a lot of racial diversity, addressing that is sometimes a convenient excuse. You know, well, we don't have much diversity. Well, why do you think we don't have diverse, right? You know, all that. Do you want to talk about that? My hunch is that Southminster was probably not a remarkably racially diverse congregation.
That is true. We had a member who died of cancer who was African, but she was not African American. And I would say in Idaho, the largest group of minorities are refugees, right? Idaho, before the crash in 2008, 2009, was a preferred refugee resettlement area. So if you see people who are Black or brown skinned, they are likely refugees, because Idaho has as many of you might know, a very conflicted racial history with white supremacy. And you know, and I will say also, what happened in the Capitol last week is not a surprise to anybody from Idaho, because those same people have been invading our capital here and storming around with open carry stuff and protests for a while, ever since Bundy kind of took over that BLM office 5 years ago. There's been a growing resurgence of the white supremacy that had kind of laid dormant for a while in Idaho, and it's kind of come back. So true. The congregation in Boise was did not have any racial diversity to speak of. The historic minority population in Boise Presbytery, honestly, is Japanese members whose families stayed in Idaho after they were interred here during World War II. There was a program to offer them land to farm after World War II. So many of them stayed. Yeah, so the race, I mean, Southminster was doing some anti-racism work and had read Waking Up White when Jan and Denise, as co-moderators, had the denomination read that, and started reading a few other books and doing some education. But I would say the race piece wasn't as much in our conversations here. You know, it's interesting watching the vaccine rollout now and seeing the Black Americans who are saying that they won't get the vaccine because of the years and years and years of disparate healthcare and discriminatory healthcare that they have faced. And you know, there's a whole lot of chickens coming home to roost right now with the structures of our racism from that. But yeah, you know, if you don't have access to clean drinking water, like Flint still does not in Michigan, if you don't have access to, you know, well child appointments and you know, all of those things, then the health outcomes, just the disparity just gets wider and wider and wider. Yeah. And then environmental factors as well. I also served on mission responsibility through investment committee for the denomination, and they're looking at environmental and the relationship of environmental and racism problems. And so, you know, we've toured communities along the Louisiana Gulf Coast and Flint, Michigan, and that I still almost can't speak of what I saw on those trips. It was so unbelievable. Like in South Louisiana, we were in a boat driving, you know, across the water, and all of a sudden I was like, that's a street sign in the middle of this water. And I realized we were riding a boat, you know, on a boat across over what used to be a community largely of African Americans that has now been taken over by rising waters. So, you know, other communities that are directly downwind of oil refineries and, you know, all of like where 70% of children have asthma and other like skin conditions and things from the chemical pollutants in the air. You know, how are you supposed to learn and be healthy? And, you know, when the air you breathe and the water you drink isn't even clean. And this is in our own country, right? Where we talk about having the cleanest water in the world, and we don't. Yeah.
So much. Yeah. So always scanning the screen to see if there are folks who look like they might be percolating with a question or a comment. Jill, and then Mike.
You made a comment about the amount of debt that can be bought down, and you said something about, you know, it goes from 50 to 25% to 10. If we're talking to people and trying to drum up interest, how is that scale determined? Is that determined by the amount of money raised for contribution, or how is
Yes. So that scale is actually something different than RIP. So RIP, when they purchase debt, they're trying to get as much debt as they can for as little amount of money. So they're getting it at kind of at the end of the stream. So the broader kind of our economic structure for this debt is if a doctor's office or a hospital or whoever sells debt that hasn't been paid, the first place they sell it to might give them 50 cents on the dollar. And then if that debt collector can't pay it and they want to recoup something, they might sell it for 25 cents on the dollar, right? And so that's the stream I'm talking about. So by the time RIP gets involved so that they can purchase as much debt as possible, and there's not, in most states, there is not a lot of regulation about about protecting people from those people who purchase the debt. So you can, people can get these just terribly harassing phone calls, people knocking on their door, like harassment at work. And there's a big payout, right? I mean, if you're a predatory debt collector and you buy $1,000 worth of debt, right, and you paid $1 for it, right? If you get anything out of it, you're making money, right? So it's so there can be a big incentive for those predatory debt collectors to really, they just harass and harangue people, and people have lost jobs because their employers are like, we just can't have these, these people coming around. You got to get your stuff in order. And, it can be a real problem. So, and I don't think, and most of us don't see, it's an invisible process for most of us. We don't know what happens to debt once it, once it leaves our responsibility.
Thank you.
Did that answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Mike, you had a question or a comment?
Well, now I have both. I'll just ask this question, but then maybe you could get to the question after I've shared a different thought first. The question has to do with the fact that for a lot of us, this whole business about buying debt and so forth is kind of an unfamiliar topic. And so the question would be whether RIP or some other resource can explain that in more in easily comprehensible terms. But I did want to make this thinking out loud type comment first. Early on in the conversation, you spoke about how this doesn't fix the system, and you spoke a little apologetic in a way about how this is more of a Band-Aid type thing, although you didn't use that term. So my first response was, yes, but still the compassionate outreach is really necessary. So here's the more maybe abstract thought I have about it, and that is that when we talk about our compassionate outreach, it may be really appropriate to say that actually this is a step toward justice. So for example, when we think about all sorts of people getting their $600 deposits from the government, $600, $1,200, whatever, maybe we should be raising the question about whether those of us who can afford to, as a matter of justice, ought to be giving a noteworthy percentage of that away. And that's not just about the compassionate role of someone in a superior position looking down on those who need support, but rather saying, no, the way things are, it's really just for us to be giving up more of what we have. So that's just a thought to try to blur the distinction a little bit between, compassion and justice. The one is kind of an extension of the other.
Yeah, that's helpful. And and you're right. I think, when we talked about it, you know, we said this isn't changing the system, but if people can get out from under the burden of this debt, then maybe they're going to be more inclined or more able to, you know, to flourish and to, you know, succeed and to move on. So it's, you know, it's certainly, you know, we decided it certainly did meet the, you know, meet that challenge and criteria, at least. In terms of video, I believe, so John Oliver's late night show is actually where I first heard about it. So if you look for him online, John Oliver and RIP, there's a segment that he did where they talked about it. And I believe that it used to be on their website, I think on RIP's website, there at least are some videos there, I believe, about how the process works. But yeah, I learned about it from a late night TV show.
Okay.
Oh, maybe we can find the video. Is it there?
Yeah, I'm sharing the homepage for RIP, which gives you a good opportunity. There's lots of explanation here.
Okay.
I don't know if the John Oliver
clip may not be. See, there was a clip there. There was a video.
Well, I'll keep looking, but I wanted folks who want.
If you scroll down a little bit, there was a video, I think.
Sure.
I think we have. Yeah. See what that might be worth it.
You want to watch it? You want me to
Sure.
play? You're in charge.
Don't give me all the power.
Can you all hear the audio? No.
Not yet.
That's the problem with video on Zoom.
Yeah. There may be something about up in the corner on Zoom for you about share audio. Maybe it won't work, but anyways, it's there.
I'm not finding the share audio. Oh, wait a second. I'm not finding it,
Okay.
Marci, and so I don't want to
Yeah, that's fine.
waste folks' time, but ripmedicaldebt.org.
And then I can also, Jennifer, I can look up and send you the links of the news stories that the TV station did here that covers it pretty well too. And that's a pretty short little news clip. So
That's very kind of you. We're certainly
you can forward that on.
quite able to Google things, but
Yeah.
that's good too. So unless there are other questions, I have another thought. Carol McDonald.
Yes. One question, Marci, since it started as a Southminster thing, how did you go about engaging the presbytery? How did you invite the presbytery into the conversation and the action?
Actually, it was somebody from the presbytery who is a medical ethicist at one of the hospitals as a chaplain. And he heard about what we were doing, and he knew about some money that the presbytery had that might be a good kind of fit for that project. And so he proposed that, and Boise had, I'm trying to think if we had, I can't remember now the timeline of how this happened with us becoming we had actually, I think, so we at the same meeting, I think, became a Matthew 25 congregation is when we did this. Or maybe it became Matthew 25 and then the next meeting we did this. So I made the, he told me about they had some money, and then actually our Synod exec was there just kind of coincidentally to, and so she said, somebody made a challenge in the presbytery meeting, kind of like you did, it sounds like, Carol, where they offered to, kind of match donations that people in the room made. And so we got, I think, $1,000 just cash or checks that people handed me that day and that at the meeting. And then plus some more money from the presbytery. as well. But it, you know, we'd already had kind of the conversation about Matthew 25. And the other thing I'll say about Boise Presbytery is small but mighty. It's, you know, there's 11 churches, I think, in it now. And we've had a hard, like, it was a hard row for a while with churches leaving, and there was a lot of fighting over things. And, you know, I'm sure all of you know what that's about. And I think people just were excited to have something that they could do together. Right. I mean, it was an exciting meeting to be able to, like, look at us. We can do this. We've forgotten how. And so I think it was a good thing to help get our presbytery kind of back in. I mean, we were already working together pretty well, I think, by that point, but there were still a lot of wounds and a lot of, you know, a lot of people were like, I'm just going to do this myself because going through the presbytery is driving me nuts. And, you know, so I think that this kind of helped us heal a lot of that by giving us something to do together.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Carol. That was a great question. And thanks, Marci, for a glimpse into Presbytery of Boise. I want to flip it back again, because you know that we're a Matthew 25 mid-council, and we've had this foray into RIP medical data, and we're getting ready to ask the Presbytery if we can turn around and encourage congregations to adopt it as a challenge as well. And I heard you say at the beginning of your remarks that the congregational vitality piece and the missional aspect of encouraging Southminster at that time to think about what mission looks like beyond financial gifts, sending dollars. Would you talk to us a little bit more about that challenge, which I think many of us know really well and have our own stories to tell, but any glimpses of hope and any inroads that you have experienced in Boise or in San Francisco at this related to, you know, the connection between when you look outside your walls for relationship building, congregational vitality also improves. We know that folks who are solely focused on COVID and when they can get back to in-person worship are struggling mightily with fatigue at this point and exhaustion. And we know, conversely, that congregations that have kept their focus, engaged with relationships in their community, even while they're not able to gather in person, are finding a little more staying power, which is not to say they're not tired too. So talk to us about that, the congregational vitality part of Matthew 25 and the missional connection.
Yeah, so Southminster is a congregation that, honestly, let me just say, I would still be happily serving there if some other church wouldn't have come along and God wouldn't have, like, you know, told me to go somewhere else. Like, I was perfectly happy at Southminster. I love that congregation. And but when I first got there 12 years ago, they were really interior focused. And one day I said, well, who lives in our neighborhood? Because nobody from the church really lived in our neighborhood, and they had no idea. And they kind of had opinions, but they didn't have any actual knowledge of who lived in our neighborhood. I'm like, well, let's go meet the neighbors. And that just sounded like the worst kind of, like, terrifying door-to-door evangelism that they did not want to do. And I'm like, no, we're going to do this. We're just going to go. We're not going to beat people over the head with anything. But we wrote a little letter that we were going to just hand people and say, hi, we're from the church down the street, and we just wanted to say hi and meet our neighbors. And the letter said, you know, it was before Christmas, like it was early December. And the letter said, you know, we want to be good neighbors. If there's ways we can support this community, please let us know. You know, if you have a faith community, please, you know, let them know we want to be good neighbors with them as well. If you're looking for one, blah, 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 all that stuff. So the first day I scheduled to do it, I got maybe 6 or 7 elders there because I threatened them pretty harshly. I was like, you must come to this. So they showed up and they were good sports about it. And but the deacons wouldn't go. They're like, well, we have to set up for our own Christmas party. And I'm like, come on. Like, I was so frustrated. And so so the elders who went out, you know, they would knock on the door and people would kind of, you could just tell people were like, who are you? And then when they realized we weren't asking for anything, you could just see their walls come down and you could see their guard go down. And they were like, oh, we've always wondered about that church and we didn't know, or thank you, or we go to this church and we should do this too. And, you know, or we've come to trunk or treat at your church, or, you know, it was just all these great conversations. And so the elders came back and they were hugely energized by having done that. And so I had them do some minutes for mission and worship to talk about that. And what that led us to recognize is there were a lot of refugee families living in our neighborhood, which we didn't know. And a lot of LDS families. Boise is about 30% LDS. And we live, our church is very close to one of the temples. So it led us to reach out to the school that's right next door to Southminster to see if we could be helpful to them. And they're like, you know, we would love to have some grandmas and grandpas who could come and just like let kids read to them or play checkers with them. And so we had some volunteers who would go to the church or go to the school every week. And some would grade paper. Some were retired teachers, so they were more useful for that kind of thing. So they would grade papers or whatever. Some would just let kids practice their reading. One guy, Martin, who I love Martin, he was on the PNC that called me, and he has kind of Parkinson's that, you know, so he has a walker, but he would go to school every week, and he was the reward for children who had behaved well during the morning or that week. They would get to play checkers with Martin at lunch. And so Martin would just play games with these kids. And what he said is that, he said, I think this is the only time in the week that there's an adult who's paying attention to them, that has time, you know, and it's not because their parents don't care. It's their parents were working 2 jobs or, you know, whatever. So that kind of helped start, you know, some stuff. And then the school would come over and the choir would do a concert for our seniors group. They still do that, come over and do a concert for the seniors group every year. And some of the parents would come over for that too. And so we developed a good relationship with the school. They'll still call us if they need help paying for, you know, choir uniforms or, you know, things like that. We had some money in a fund from the church's 50th anniversary that we offered to the school. One of the teachers had said that they couldn't go on field trips because they didn't have any money for field trips. So we gave money to pay for one bus trip for each class, in each classroom in the school. And we helped them with registration for kindergarten and all that stuff. So the school ended up being a good way for Southminster to learn about how to kind of be involved in the community. It still was sort of you know, a challenge to move beyond that, but that did end up being kind of a helpful, life-giving thing. I will say in one of the things that helped me when I was discerning this call to Calvary in San Francisco is Calvary is a church that has quite a bit of resources. I will say it that way. And they had decided a number of years ago to rather than to kind of monitor or like to administer programs themselves, they just give big grants to community partners that are working to alleviate poverty. So they give $40,000 a year to 4 different organizations. I think right now it's Boys and Girls Club, a group called SF Achievers, which helps African-American boys kind of go on to college. Martin DePore's house, which honestly, I don't remember what it does right now. Anyways, there's a few others. So they give a fair amount of money out, but they also then volunteer in a number of places. They feed you know, they work with the food pantries and they feed people every Saturday. Most Saturdays I go over to a interfaith food pantry with a couple of other faith communities that has been developed since the pandemic began, and we're giving food in this neighborhood little food pantry to 350 people a week. And those are all over the city. And so Calvary seems to have a much easier time of giving of themselves, like being in relationship, mentoring, and working with, I mean, they do give money too, but I wish I could show you the video now. It's not quite ready to be released, but a couple of years ago, Calvary voted to become a sanctuary church. And so they put a sign up on the building that said, immigrants and refugees are welcome here. And not long after that, a Honduran man was walking down the street and saw the sign. And he said, God put a voice in his head saying, son, they will help you. Knock on their door. So he knocked on the door and he said, it says you'll help immigrants and refugees. I'm a refugee. I need help. And the church was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't think they expected anybody to actually knock on the door from that. But the sanctuary team got together, and this man and his son had fled Honduras because a gang was trying to recruit his son. And they knew that if they stayed, his son would have to be in the gang or would be killed. And so he and his son left, and his wife and 3 other children remained in Honduras. And then the gang started threatening his wife and younger children in case, you know, because they wanted the son to come back. So the family fled north as well, and they got stuck in Tijuana. And so the wife and 3 younger children were in Tijuana for 8 months. And so Calvary sent a team down to Tijuana with some lawyers and got the wife and the other kids to get up to San Francisco and reunited the family just last year, about this time last year, right before Christmas. And the 14-year-old son, or he's 15 now probably, his asylum case has been heard. The rest of the family is still in process, but Calvary had a team that would go to court with them every time, and they found out from the judge that their presence mattered because it showed the judge that these people had support and were going to make it as they went through it. And so we've just produced a 6-minute video about that we're going to be broadcasting soon. And I'll the person who made it was like, so we're going to show it in an adult ed class. I'm like, and in worship and everywhere we can possibly show. I mean, I was like, it's a beautiful video. It's great. And then there's another person that they're helping through the sanctuary process right now. He's actually living with one of our associate pastors while he's a young gay man from Guatemala. So while he's getting his asylum process, he's living with one of our pastors. So I will say Calvary's willingness to go out in the community is something that, you know, kind of appealed to me when I was looking at that. And again, we could still do better and do more, but it's nice to see. So now we're working on our own anti-racism stuff. I mean, it's still there's people of color in the church, but it's still a white church with a lot of money. And, you know, and it's got some reckoning to do, but we're watching each month. We watch a movie this month. This weekend we're watching I'm Not Your Negro, and we're reading a book every month. And the book this month is what is it called? The Color of Law, which is an excellent book. So we're doing that, and those discussions have been really good and really challenging. And so yeah, I feel like I've been talking too much. Sorry.
Well, I don't think so. I think you've given us lots of reminders, you know, without bringing out your yellow highlighter, that there are calls to us pre-pandemic, during the pandemic. We don't know what post-pandemic is going to be like yet, but we long for that day. And the reminder that it's all about relationships, and it's all about getting deeply involved in one's neighborhood and one's context. And some of the folks on this call, Marci, know about that really well. And others know more about, the remark you made at the beginning, that it's hard to invite people to explore relationships. But that's costly in a different kind of way.
And I think in terms of the congregational vitality, at first when I saw that as one of the 3 areas on Matthew 25, I thought, what? But then I realized that they all kind of flow together, and you can't have congregational vitality unless you're working on the other things, and you can't really work on the other things unless there's some level of vitality. And in the Calvary story, like I think like if I had heard Calvary's story while I was at Southminster, I would say, well, of course you can do all that. You have a foundation that has a ton of money, and so go away. The rest of us are here struggling through things. But I think that the church in Boise, that was probably one of the most vital, has 40 members and no money, and they're very rural. They don't even have a full-time pastor. And they, the schools in their community, Idaho doesn't fund education very well, shocked. And so the schools were going down to 4 days a week because of budget cuts. And so this church was like, well, what are these kids going to do the other day? All these families are working, and it's an agricultural community. So a lot of people who don't have the leisure of saying, oh, I'm just not going to work on a Wednesday. So this church opened its doors on the day that school wasn't opened, and they provide games and tutoring and lunch and activities and stuff for kids. And they have all these kids who don't ever come to church otherwise. Well, now they actually are starting to, but they weren't members of the church at all, but were just kids in the community who needed some place to go. And this is a church that has nobody and no money, and they have a hugely vital and important thing going in the community. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's about 3 minutes till, and so we want to say thank you, Marci, for coming on over, zooming on over to be with us today. You've given us lots to think about, and inspiring stories, and a challenge to share, if only internally, perhaps, but maybe with some other folks in our lives. And we're very, very grateful. Friends, next week, we're going to be visited by representatives from Hoosier Power and Light. Mike Penninan is familiar with this organization and suggested this would be a good Thursday topic. It seems very pertinent, certainly to people who are concerned about the stewardship of the environment and creation care. It strikes me that our visit with them is also going to be very helpful, because there are lots of things we can be attending to while our buildings are less populated with people, perhaps, some of them. And so it's, the pandemic really is not much of an excuse for being thoughtful about the stewardship of our space. So we'll look forward to having them with us next Thursday as well. I want to thank you all for being here and joining us. I hope you'll join me in a closing prayer, and then we'll fling wide the doors and you're free to leave, or you're free to stay in the narthex and chat either with Marci or one another for a few minutes, because we don't have a 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock Zoom call waiting in the wings. So let's pray together. Here's a prayer from Howard Thurman. Open to us light for our darkness. Open to us courage for our fear. Open to us hope for our despair. Open to us peace for our turmoil. Open to us joy for our sorrow. Open to us strength for our weakness. Open unto us wisdom for our confusion. Open unto us forgiveness for our sins. Open unto us love for our hates. Open unto us yourself for ourselves. God, open unto us. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks again, everybody. Take good care of yourselves.